This video is about nouns, but about two nouns in particular, the nouns we use to name our sexed bodies. I want you to imagine for a moment what would happen in a world where a few nouns went missing. We go to the shopkeeper and we ask for tree fruits with seeded cores which are roughly spherical, tree fruits which are slightly wider at the bottom. Would anybody know what we were talking about? It's much easier when we have nouns, simple naming words, to group the different types of fruit. The same is true for all material objects which we wish to name and discuss. Nouns aren't just nice, they're necessary. Now, when we think about humans, we can be divided into two completely distinct types. One type has a reproductive system which, when it's fully functional, is capable of growing a baby. The other group has a different reproductive system which is aimed at producing half cells, which provide one half of the genetic material for the new baby. So we have two groups, two different reproductive systems. And do we have nouns for those groups? Well, we used to. We don't anymore. The nouns that we used to use were women and girls for one group and men and boys for the other. But the meaning of those words has now changed, and you might not have noticed. Recently, a Scottish law changed the meaning of the word woman to mean anyone who identifies as a woman. Now, since some people in this group don't identify as a woman, and some people in this group do, the new category woman is completely unlinked to sex. And that has massive implications, because we still need a word to name the adults and children who might experience periods, for example, or endometriosis, cervical cancer, polycystic ovarian syndrome, pregnancy, miscarriage, abortion, ovarian cancer, menopause, many more. Is it okay to have a noun to name that group? Well, not according to Patrick Harvey. He's the co-leader of the Scottish Greens at the moment, and yesterday on the radio he said, no, using a word like that to mean sex is like racism, and it's very bad. So using the noun woman to mean these groups of people is like racism. That has huge implications for us. If we want to identify the group of people who should come for a smear test, we could use a long-winded description of the people who fit that category. But it doesn't really communicate effectively at all, especially if the people that you're communicating to don't have English as their first language. So words matter. Now, Patrick Harvey might say, don't be ridiculous, it's just simple. Be inclusive. Call them cis women, trans men, and non-binary people who were assigned female at birth. You might have come across those categories before. But let's just unpack that for a moment and see whether it's actually working. He says, just be inclusive. Well, have we included everybody? What about somebody who says they're agender? Does this categorization include them? And what about people who say cis women? Well, I don't know what that means, and I'm not one. Or what about that word female here? Some trans women say, well, they believe themselves to be female. So what's going on? Words really do matter, and their meanings do matter. So what does Patrick Harvey mean when he says it is akin to racism to use a word like woman and to mean it in relation to our sex bodies? What he's actually saying is that it's like racism to use one word to group people together on the basis of their sex bodies, but it is okay to group those people together so long as you use at least 15 words to do it, while still managing to miss some people out and causing some offence to others. He's saying it's okay to group people according to their reproductive sex. So it's not akin to racism. It's just not okay to give that group a name. It's not just in medicine that we use the word woman to have a particular meaning. We also currently have lots of laws which are aimed at one or other of our sex categories, men or women. If this change in the meaning of the word woman in Scots law, in the most recent Scots law, is applied to all our existing laws, then the intention of those laws themselves changes completely, without ever having been discussed. There would be all manner of unimagined and unintended consequences if we push through changes to laws without first discussing them. That's not the basis for sound law or for fair governance. Patrick Harvey, the Scottish Greens, and lots of people across all political parties and none understandably want to recognise and acknowledge the truly felt gender identities of trans people. Many people across all parties also want to ensure that our laws are fair to everyone and are discussed fully and openly before any changes are made. And all people of all walks of life need meaningful words to accurately describe our sexed bodies. So what's the solution? It's not hard. we talk. Not a debate where we're taking sides, just an open-minded discussion. The interesting thing about trans rights and women's rights is just how thought-provoking it is when we actually open the subject matter up for discussion. Have you ever thought, for example, about the vulnerability of young boys when parents send them off to the toilets on their own for the first time? Think of a 6-year-old in the public swimming pools. It's a really interesting question. Is our current system of sex-segregated toilets primarily about protection of vulnerable individuals, women and girls, for example, or is it primarily about privacy or something else? If it's protection, then how do we protect all vulnerable people from potential abuse? And what about other circumstances where maybe men or trans women and non-binary people with a male sex body suffer from domestic abuse or sexual assault? Do we have enough services to cater properly for their needs? Do they feel supported to come forward and seek help? There are hundreds of discussions like these that could and indeed should be being held openly and with open hearts and minds to really think about and reflect upon the issues. If people were willing to open their hearts and minds to discussion, we might all be surprised by the creative and compassionate solutions we could collectively arrive at. However, what we can't do without is nouns. Just as we need nouns for tree fruit of different shapes and sizes, so too do we need words for our different reproductive systems and for the people with those systems. We could invent new words, but why not stick with the ones we've got? Women and men. We don't need to use those categories all the time. Sex only matters sometimes, but it does matter sometimes. Some people, for the sake of their well-being, wish or need to present themselves to the world as if their bodies have the opposite reproductive system. We have a combination of nouns and adjectives for them, trans men and trans women. Although the trans part is an adjective, it's an adjective which changes the meaning of the noun. Words can be so cool when we use them properly. Some people prefer to present themselves with no indication as to their reproductive system whatsoever, and we have a combination of words for them too. We can call them non-binary people who are either male or female. Some people are really not concerned about their bodies. They don't suffer from any form of dysphoria, but they wish to be perceived as they perceive themselves, to belong to the opposite category. That's fine. Most people are happy to accept anyone exactly as they are. Why adults feel the way they do about their identities is important to them, but for everyone else it's really none of our business. What matters is that we are all recognised and accepted for who we feel ourselves to be. We all have identities, whether they're national, religious, sports-based, or, for some people, really important gender identities. For trans and non-binary people, everyone can help and recognise their identities by using pronouns, he, she, or they. We can use the ones which fit how trans and non-binary people feel about themselves, and it's not particularly hard. But it doesn't change the categories to which we belong. No one can ever actually belong to the opposite sex category, and they can never belong to no sex category either, because each one of us does have a sex body, even if that body has developed in a different way and doesn't entirely match all the elements of one or other of the two categories. Everyone already knows this. We all know that nouns name categories, and we all know that we need those names for categories. So Patrick Harvey and other people like him is not just wrong when he says that trans women are wrong, he's categorically wrong. Trans women are not women, not biologically anyway, and they know that they're not biological women. Patrick Harvey and everyone else on the planet knows they're not biological women. Acceptance of that is not unkind, nor is it exclusionary. It's definitely nothing like racism. It's not denying someone's existence or their right to exist or their need for appropriate services. It's just necessary. With the right will, we could make the world the best possible place for everyone, but we can't do that without words to describe our bodies. We all need those nouns, and the world would be a much better, kinder, and more thoughtful place when everyone finally stops pretending that we don't. So why not join me in being pro-nouns? Because they just make sense.